a hidden melody, an unspoken confession. When Jungkook finally plays it, Jimin realizes the truth he was never meant to hear. During a music composition workshop, Jungkook played a melody he never showed. When Jimin asked, he only replied quietly, "I wrote this when I couldn't tell you. I wrote this when I couldn't tell you." The last note trembled in the air like it was afraid to disappear, a fragile thread of sound suspended between silence and something far more dangerous. Jimin didn't breathe. No one in the workshop did. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, buzzing like a distant warning, but all of it, the room, the people, the world, collapsed into the space between Jungkook's fingers and the keys he had just abandoned. Jimin swallowed, but his throat felt tight, as if the melody had wrapped around it. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Jungkook didn't look at him. That was the first thing Jimin noticed. Not the words, not the music, but the way Jungkook's gaze remained fixed on the keyboard, as though meeting Jimin's eyes would unravel something irreversible. The workshop instructor cleared his throat awkwardly, attempting to break the tension. "That was impressive, Jungkook, very emotive. Would you like to explain your composition process?" But Jungkook didn't respond. Instead, his fingers hovered over the keys again, almost instinctively, as if they were drawn back by a force stronger than thought. A single note slipped out, soft, hesitant, and Jimin felt it land somewhere deep in his chest. He knew that note. Not consciously, not logically, but his body recognized it the way you recognize a memory you've tried too hard to forget. Jimin stepped forward. The wooden floor creaked beneath his weight, too loud in the silence. "Jungkook," he said, softer now, more careful, "when did you write it?" A pause is the kind that stretches just long enough to make you regret asking. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his shoulders rising and falling as though he had been holding his breath for years instead of seconds. "A long time ago." "How long?" Another pause. Then finally Jungkook turned. Their eyes met, and for a brief, unbearable moment, Jimin felt exposed, like Jungkook could see every unspoken thought he had ever tried to bury. "Before things changed," Jungkook said. The words landed heavier than they should have. Because things had changed, they both knew it. Everyone did, even if no one talked about it directly. There was a time when Jimin and Jungkook moved in perfect rhythm, shared glances, unfinished sentences, laughter that didn't need explanation. And then something fractured. No one could point to the exact moment it happened. But Jimin remembered the feeling. Like reaching for something familiar in the dark, and realizing it wasn't there anymore. "What does that mean?" Jimin asked, his voice tightening despite himself. Jungkook hesitated. And that hesitation, that split second of uncertainty, hurt more than any answer could have. "It's just a melody," Jungkook said finally too quickly. "You're overthinking it." Jimin let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Am I?" The air shifted. The rest of the class suddenly felt like intruders, witnesses to something they weren't meant to see. A few people exchanged glances, someone coughed, the instructor pretended to check his notes. But no one moved. Because something was happening. Something raw and unfinished. "You never shared it before," Jimin continued, taking another step closer. "Not with anyone." Jungkook's jaw tightened. So it matters." "It doesn't." "It does to me." "That did it." Jungkook flinched, barely noticeable but enough. Jimin saw it. And for a fleeting second, something flickered across Jungkook's face, fear maybe or regret, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by something more controlled, more distant. "You shouldn't read into everything," Jungkook said. Jimin shook his head slowly. "And you shouldn't hide behind half-truths." Silence again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy. Charged. Jungkook stood abruptly, the bench scraping loudly against the floor. The sound snapped the rest of the room back to reality, and suddenly people were moving again, shifting, whispering, pretending not to stare. "I need some air," Jungkook muttered. And then he walked out. Just like that. No explanation, no glance back. Jimin stood there, rooted in place, the echo of the melody still vibrating through him. He hated that it affected him this much. hated that something as simple as a few notes could unravel him so completely. But more than anything, he hated that he understood. Not the details, not the story behind it, but the feeling. That quiet, aching kind of confession that never finds its way into words. Jimin closed his eyes briefly, letting the memory surface. Late nights, shared headphones, Jungkook humming unfinished melodies under his breath, thinking no one was listening. Jimin had always listened. Maybe that was the problem. When he opened his eyes again, the room felt smaller, suffocating. "I'll be back," he told no one in particular. And then he followed. The hallway outside was dimmer, quieter. The faint scent of dust and old wood lingered in the air, mixing with something colder, the sharp bite of night seeping in through cracked windows. Jimin spotted Jungkook at the far end, standing near the emergency exit. For a moment he just watched. Jungkook's posture was different here, less guarded but also more fragile. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his head tilted slightly back, as if he were trying to steady himself against something unseen. Jimin approached slowly. "You always do that," he said. Jungkook didn't turn. "Do what?" "Leave before things get complicated." A quiet scoff. "You think this is complicated?" "I think you're making it that way." That got his attention. Jungkook turned sharply, his eyes flashing with something raw. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me." "I can't. Won't." Jungkook's expression hardened. "There's a difference." Jimin stepped closer, closing the distance between them until the tension felt almost tangible, like a wire stretched too tight. "Then explain it to me," he said, softer now, "because right now it just feels like you're shutting me out for no reason." Jungkook let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "There is a reason," he said quietly. "Then say it." Another pause. Longer this time. He looked at Jimin then, not quickly, not hesitantly, but fully. And there it was again. That look. The one that made Jimin feel like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't step back from. "I wrote that melody," Jungkook said slowly, "on a night when I realized something I wasn't ready to admit." Jimin's heart skipped. "What?" Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. "That I was already too far gone to pretend it didn't matter." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Jimin's chest tightened. Too far gone for what? Jungkook's lips parted slightly. For a second, just one, Jimin thought he was going to say it. Really say it. But then, Jungkook shook his head. "I can't," he whispered. And this time it didn't sound like avoidance. It sounded like fear. Real, undeniable fear. Jimin felt something crack inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to change everything. "Fine," he said quietly. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. "Fine." Jimin nodded, though it felt heavier than it should. "If you can't say it, then don't." The words tasted wrong. But he said them anyway. Because some truths once spoken can't be taken back. And maybe, just maybe, Jimin wasn't ready to hear them either. They stood there in silence, the distance between them now filled with everything left unsaid. And somewhere deep in Jimin's mind, the melody played again. Only this time, it hurt more. "You really meant that, didn't you?" Jimin's voice cut through the quiet like something sharp and unfinished, and Jungkook stopped mid-step, his hand still on the cold metal bar of the emergency exit. For a moment he didn't turn. The faint hum of electricity in the hallway filled the silence, but it wasn't enough to drown out the tension pressing in from all sides. Jimin could feel it building again, heavier this time, like a storm that had only been delayed, not avoided. "Meant what?" Jungkook asked finally, his voice lower now, rougher, like it had been worn down by everything he refused to say. Jimin let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Don't do that, don't pretend like you don't know." Jungkook's fingers tightened around the bar. "You're asking questions you're not ready for." "Then make me ready." That was new. Jimin heard it the second the words left his mouth, the challenge, the edge, the desperation threaded beneath it. It wasn't careful anymore, it wasn't safe. Jungkook turned slowly. "Why are you pushing this?" he asked, his eyes searching Jimin's face like he was trying to find something specific, an answer or maybe a reason to stop. Jimin stepped closer, his pulse loud in his ears. "Because you started it." "I played a song." "No," Jimin said, shaking his head. "You dropped something in the middle of the room and walked away like it wouldn't follow you." Jungkook exhaled sharply. "It's just music." "Then play it again." "Silence." "Play it," Jimin repeated, softer this time but somehow more intense. "Right now, here." Jungkook stared at him, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're serious?" "Yes." "There's no piano here, Jimin." "Then hum it, tap it, I don't care." Jimin's voice wavered just slightly. "But don't act like it didn't mean anything when I can still hear it." "That hit." Jungkook looked away, his jaw tightening, and for a second it seemed like he might refuse again. Shut it down, walk away, bury it like he always did. But then, a quiet sound. Soft, barely there. Jimin froze. Jungkook was humming. It started low, uncertain, like he was testing whether he should even be doing it. The melody was thinner without the piano, stripped down to something more vulnerable, more exposed, but it was the same. Exactly the same. And it felt worse. Jimin's chest tightened painfully as the notes unfolded, slow and aching, each one landing like it carried something unsaid. "You wrote this alone?" Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook didn't stop. "Yes." "No one else heard it?" "No." "Not even," Jimin hesitated then forced it out, "not even me." The humming faltered. "Just for a second." "But it was enough." Jimin's breath caught. "Why?" Jungkook went silent. The absence of the melody felt louder than the sound itself. "Because you were there," Jungkook said finally. Jimin blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" Jungkook let out a short, bitter laugh. "It means I couldn't." "That doesn't make sense." "It does," Jungkook snapped, sharper now. "You just don't want it to." Jimin flinched, but he didn't back down. "Then explain it to me." "I was trying to keep something from changing," Jungkook said, his voice unsteady despite the force behind it. "If I played it, if I said anything, it wouldn't stay the same anymore." Jimin's heart started to pound harder, and that was so bad. "Yes." The answer came too quickly. Too honestly. Jimin stared at him. "Why?" Jungkook hesitated again, but this time it looked different, less like avoidance, more like he was standing on the edge of something he had been holding back for too long. "Because I knew you wouldn't pretend," Jungkook said quietly. "You never do." Jimin swallowed. "Pretend what?" "That it didn't mean something." The words landed hard. Too hard. Jimin felt them settle deep, somewhere he couldn't easily ignore. "So you decided for me?" he asked, his voice tightening. "You decided I wouldn't understand?" "No," Jungkook said, shaking his head quickly. "I decided you would." That silenced him. Completely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway seemed colder now, the dim light casting long shadows that stretched between them like something tangible, something dividing them in ways they hadn't acknowledged before. Jimin took a slow step forward. "Then why didn't you trust me?" Jungkook's expression shifted, something breaking through the control he'd been clinging to. "Because it wasn't just about trust," he said. "It was about timing." "Timing," Jimin repeated, disbelief creeping in. "You think this is some kind of schedule, like if you waited long enough it would just fix itself?" "I thought it would go away." "And did it?" Jungkook didn't answer. "He didn't need to." Jimin laughed again, but this time it sounded more like frustration than anything else. "So what, you just carried it around, pretended everything was normal while, what, writing songs you never planned to share?" Jungkook's silence was answer enough. Jimin shook his head, packing once before turning back to him. "That's not fair." "I know. You don't get to decide what I can handle." "I wasn't trying to protect you." Jimin froze. Then what were you doing? Jungkook met his gaze, and this time there was no hesitation. I was trying to protect myself. That was the truth. Jimin felt it instantly, the weight of it settling in his chest, heavy and undeniable. From me. From what I felt around you. The air shifted again. Something sharper now, more dangerous. Jimin's voice dropped. And what exactly was that? Jungkook's breath hitched, just slightly but enough. And then, like something inside him, finally snapped. Everything. The word echoed between them. Too big, too much. Jimin's pulse roared in his ears. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Then give me a better one. Jungkook stepped forward this time, closing the gap between them until there was barely any space left. You really want me to say it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper now but burning with something intense, something that made Jimin's chest tighten. Yes. Jungkook searched his face one last time, as if looking for an exit. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. You were never just you, Jungkook said slowly. Not to me. Jimin's breath caught. I tried to ignore it, Jungkook continued, his voice shaking now despite himself. Tried to convince myself it was nothing, that it would pass, that I could just. He let out a frustrated breath, running a hand through his hair, focus on everything else. But you couldn't, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook laughed under his breath. No, I couldn't. The space between them felt electric now, every word pulling them deeper into something they had both avoided for too long. Jimin's voice softened, but it didn't lose its intensity. So you wrote it instead? Yes. And you hid it? Yes. Because you thought if I heard it, it would be real, Jungkook finished. Silence. Not empty. Not quiet. But full, overflowing with everything they hadn't said, everything they were finally beginning to understand. Jimin looked at him differently now. Not confused. Not uncertain. But aware. Painfully aware. And now, Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't look away this time. Now you've heard it. Jimin nodded slowly, his heart still racing but steadier somehow, like it had finally found the rhythm it had been searching for. Yes, he said. A long pause stretched between them. Then Jimin took one last step forward, close enough that there was no space left to misunderstand anything. And you're right, he said quietly, I'm not pretending. Jungkook's breath hitched again. Good, he whispered. And for the first time, neither of them looked away. Then don't look away. Jimin didn't realize he had said it out loud until Jungkook's expression shifted. Something sharp, something startled, something dangerously close to breaking. The hallway felt too narrow now, the walls pressing in as if they were witnesses to something that should have stayed hidden. The dim light flickered again, catching in Jungkook's eyes, making them look darker, heavier, like they were carrying more than they could hold. I'm not, Jungkook replied, but his voice betrayed him. It wasn't steady, it wasn't certain. Jimin noticed everything. The slight tremor in his breath, the way his shoulders stayed tense like he was bracing for impact, the way his fingers twitched at his sides, as if resisting the urge to reach out or pull away. You are, Jimin said softly, but there was no gentleness in the truth, just not with your eyes. Jungkook frowned. What does that even mean? It means you're here, Jimin said, stepping even closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off Jungkook's skin, but you're still holding something back. Jungkook let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. You think I'm holding back, after everything I just said? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. And that made Jungkook's expression darken. You don't get it, Jungkook muttered, shaking his head as he took a step back this time, finally putting space between them again. You think this is easy for me? I don't think it's easy, Jimin shot back, his voice rising slightly. I think you're choosing the safe version of the truth. There is no safe version. There is for you. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then prove it, Jimin challenged, his voice cutting through the air like something sharp. Say it properly. Silence. Jungkook stared at him, something conflicted flashing across his face. Like he was being pushed into a corner he couldn't escape from. You want everything spelled out? Jungkook asked quietly. Yes. You want me to ruin whatever this is? Jimin didn't flinch. I think you already did that the moment you decided not to trust me with it. That hit harder than anything else. Jungkook inhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling like he was trying to steady himself, but it wasn't working, not anymore. You really don't understand, Jungkook said, his voice lower now, almost strained. Once I say it, there's no going back. Jimin's gaze didn't waver. Then stop acting like we can. That broke something. Jungkook's restraint snapped in a way that wasn't loud, wasn't explosive, but it was final. Fine, he said, his voice suddenly sharp, raw, unfiltered. You want the truth, here it is. Jimin's heart pounded so hard it almost drowned everything else out. I wrote that melody, Jungkook continued, stepping forward again, closing the distance in a single, decisive movement, because I didn't know what to do with the fact that every time you looked at me like that, like I mattered more than I should, I couldn't breathe. Jimin froze. The words didn't just land. They hit. Hard. And I hated it, Jungkook went on, his voice shaking now, but he didn't stop. I hated that I started noticing things I shouldn't notice. The way your voice changes when you're tired, the way you get quiet when something bothering you but you won't say it, the way you... He cut himself off, his breath catching, his composure slipping further with every second. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. That's not something you just ignore, Jungkook said, his eyes locking onto Jimin's like he was daring him to look away. That's not something that just goes away if you pretend hard enough. Then why did you? Jimin asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. Because I didn't think I had a choice. The words echoed, louder than anything else that had been said. Jimin flinched. Not from the volume, but from the truth behind it. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair again, packing once like he was trying to escape his own thoughts, but there was nowhere to go. You think I wanted this? Jungkook continued, his voice rough, uneven. You think I wanted to sit there and write something that sounded like that, knowing exactly what it meant and still not being able to say it? Jimin took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. You could have. No, Jungkook said immediately, shaking his head. I couldn't. Yes, you could have, Jimin snapped, frustration breaking through now. You just chose not to. Jungkook stopped packing. Turned back to him. You think this is about choice? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Jimin hesitated. And that hesitation, just a second too long, was enough. Of course you do, Jungkook muttered, almost bitterly. Because for you everything is simple. You feel something, you say it. You don't overthink it, you don't. That's not true, Jimin cut in, his voice sharper now. You think I don't overthink things. You think I don't hold things back. Jungkook stared at him. Then why didn't you say anything? The question hit like a shock. Jimin blinked. What? You heard the melody, Jungkook said, stepping closer again, his eyes searching Jimin's face with a new kind of intensity. You felt it. I can tell you did, so why didn't you say anything first? Jimin opened his mouth, then closed it. Because suddenly, the answer wasn't as easy as he wanted it to be. Jungkook let out a quiet, humorless laugh. That's what I thought. Jimin's chest tightened. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. You're asking me to understand something you never gave me the chance to see. And you're acting like you didn't already know. Jungkook shot back, his voice rising again. I didn't know. You did. I did. The words collided between them, sharp and unyielding, neither willing to back down. For a moment, it felt like they were standing on opposite sides of something too wide to cross. Then, Jungkook stepped forward again. Too close. Close enough that Jimin could feel the tension in every inch of space between them. Then tell me this, Jungkook said, his voice low, intense, almost dangerous now. When I look at you like this, what do you feel? Jimin's breath caught. Because Jungkook wasn't just asking. He was showing. The way his gaze softened and sharpened at the same time, the way his expression held something vulnerable and overwhelming all at once, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It was everything he had been trying to say without words. Jimin's heart pounded painfully against his ribs. He started, but his voice failed him. Jungkook didn't look away. See, he murmured, you do know. Jimin swallowed hard, his mind racing, his emotions colliding in ways he couldn't untangle fast enough. It's not that simple, he said finally. Jungkook's expression faltered. Why not? Jimin hesitated. Because the truth, the real truth, was just as complicated, just as dangerous. Because if I say it, Jimin admitted quietly, his voice barely steady, then everything changes for me too. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jungkook's breath hitched. For the first time since this started, he looked uncertain. Then maybe it already has, Jungkook said softly. Jimin met his gaze. And for a moment, everything felt still. Like the world had narrowed down to this single point, this fragile, irreversible moment where nothing could stay the same. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're right, he said. Jungkook didn't move. Didn't speak. Things did change, Jimin continued, his voice quiet but clear now, steady in a way it hadn't been before. I just didn't realize when. Jungkook's eyes searched his face, as if trying to understand what that meant. And now, he asked. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, closing the distance, eliminating the space. And then, very softly, now I can't pretend either. Then say it. Jungkook's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that pressed straight into Jimin's chest. There was no distance left between them now, no space to hide, no room to retreat into half-truths or unfinished thoughts. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't have something to say, but because he had too much. His mind raced, memories colliding all at once, late nights filled with laughter that lingered too long, the quiet comfort of sitting side by side without needing words. The way Jungkook's presence had always felt different. Warmer, closer, dangerous in a way Jimin had never allowed himself to define. You think it's that easy, Jimin said finally, his voice uneven but controlled. Jungkook didn't break eye contact. No, I think it's necessary. Jimin let out a slow breath, his gaze dropping for just a second before lifting again, sharper now. And what if I say it and it's not what you want to hear? Jungkook's jaw tightened. Then at least it's real. That doesn't mean it won't break something. Jungkook gave a small, almost bitter smile. Something already broken, Jimin. That landed harder than Jimin expected. Because it was true. There had been a shift, a fracture neither of them could fully explain, but both of them felt. And now, standing here with everything exposed, it was impossible to pretend it hadn't been building for a long time. Jimin took a step back this time. Not to escape, but to think. You said you were protecting yourself, Jimin murmured, his voice quieter now, more introspective. From what you felt around me. Jungkook nodded slowly. And you think I didn't do the same? Jimin asked. Jungkook stilled. What? Jimin let out a soft, humorless exhale. You're not the only one who noticed things. Silence. Jungkook's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. What things? He asked carefully. Jimin hesitated, then shook his head slightly, like he was arguing with himself even as the words pressed forward. The way you look at me, he admitted. The way you always know when something's wrong, even when I don't say anything. The way you, he trailed off, his throat tightening but forced himself to continue. The way you make everything feel different without even trying. Jungkook's breath hitched. And you're saying that didn't mean anything to you? Jungkook asked, his voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. Jimin laughed softly, but it broke halfway through. That's the problem, it did. The air shifted again. Heavier now. More fragile. I just didn't want it to, Jimin added, his gaze flickering away for a moment before returning. Because once it does, you can't undo it. Jungkook took a slow step forward. So you ignored it? I tried. And failed. Jimin met his eyes. Just like you. A long silence followed, but this one felt different. Not tense. Not suffocating. But honest. For the first time, they weren't circling around the truth, they were standing inside it. And now, Jungkook asked again, his voice softer this time but no less intense. Jimin didn't hesitate. Now I'm tired of pretending. Jungkook's chest rose and fell slowly, like he was trying to process that, to understand what it meant beyond the words themselves. Then don't, he said. Jimin stepped closer again. Close enough that the space between them disappeared once more, charged with something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. You first, Jimin replied quietly. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. What? You want me to say it, Jimin said, his voice steady now, grounded in something stronger than hesitation. Then stop hiding behind pieces of it. Jungkook's expression hardened slightly. I already told you how I feel. No, Jimin said firmly. You told me how it affected you, that's not the same thing. That struck deeper than anything else. Jungkook's silence stretched, his gaze searching Jimin's face like he was trying to find a way out, but there wasn't one, not anymore. You're asking for something you already understand, Jungkook said finally. Understanding isn't the same as hearing it, Jimin replied. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his composure slipping again bit by bit. You really want me to say it like that? He asked. Yes. Even if it changes everything. Jimin didn't hesitate this time. It already has. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself. And when he opened them again, there was nothing left held back. He started, then stopped, his voice catching for the first time. Jimin didn't interrupt. Didn't move. Just waited. Jungkook swallowed hard, his hands curling slightly at his sides. I like you, he said finally. The words hung there, simple but heavy. But Jimin didn't react. Not yet. Because he could tell. That wasn't everything. Jungkook noticed it too. That's not all, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook let out a shaky breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Of course it's not, he murmured. His gaze didn't leave Jimin's. I tried to convince myself it was just that, Jungkook continued, his voice low, raw again, stripped of every defense. Something small, something manageable. And it was. No, Jungkook said, it was. The silence stretched again, but it felt thinner now, like it was about to break completely. Jungkook took one last step forward. Until there was nothing left between them. I don't just like you, he said, his voice steady now despite everything. I think about you more than I should, I notice things I shouldn't, and when you're not there it feels wrong in a way I don't know how to explain. Jimin's breath caught. And when you are there, Jungkook continued, quieter now, almost like a confession meant only for him, it's worse. Jimin's heart pounded harder. Because I have to pretend none of it means what it actually does. The words settled between them. Heavy. Final. Jimin felt something shift inside him, something that had been held back for too long finally breaking free. And what does it actually mean? Jimin asked softly. Jungkook didn't look away. It means I couldn't tell you, he said, because I was afraid you wouldn't feel the same. The honesty in that, raw and unfiltered, left no room for doubt. Jimin stepped even closer, if that was even possible now. Their breaths mingled. Their space gone. And now, Jimin asked. Jungkook's voice dropped to almost nothing. Now I don't know what you feel. Jimin held his gaze. For a moment. Just one. Everything felt suspended. And then, I feel it too. The words came out quieter than anything he had said before, but they hit harder than everything else combined. Jungkook froze. Completely. What? He whispered. Jimin didn't look away. I tried not to, he admitted, his voice steady now despite the way his chest tightened. I told myself it was just familiarity, comfort, something that would pass if I didn't think about it too much. Jungkook's breathing grew uneven. But it didn't, Jimin continued. No, Jungkook said softly. No, Jimin echoed. Another silence fell, but this one wasn't empty. It was full of something fragile. Something new. Something neither of them could take back. Jungkook's voice was barely there when he spoke again. Then why does this still feel like we're about to lose something? Jimin didn't answer right away. Because he felt it too. That edge. That risk. That terrifying possibility that even now, even after everything they had just said, this could still fall apart. Because we might, Jimin said honestly. Jungkook's expression flickered. But he didn't step back. Didn't retreat. Then why are we still here? Jungkook asked. Jimin's gaze softened just slightly. Because walking away would be worse. And for the first time, Jungkook didn't argue. He just stood there, close enough to feel everything, yet still on the edge of something neither of them fully understood. And neither of them moved. Then stop thinking and do something about it. Jimin didn't plan to say it. The words slipped out, sharp, reckless, charged with everything he had been holding back, and the moment they landed, the air between them shifted into something far more dangerous. Jungkook blinked, stunned. Do something. Jimin didn't step back. Yes. A beat of silence passed, but it wasn't empty. It stretched tight like a wire about to snap. You think this is that simple? Jungkook asked, his voice low, but there was something underneath it now, something unstable. No, Jimin replied immediately, but I think we've already crossed the point where pretending helps. Jungkook let out a slow breath, shaking his head like he was trying to ground himself. You're asking me to risk everything. Jimin's gaze didn't waver. You already did. That hit harder than expected. Jungkook's eyes flickered with something conflicted, something raw. You're different when you're like this, he murmured. Like what? Like you're not afraid. Jimin almost laughed, but it came out softer, more fragile. I am afraid. Then why are you pushing this? Jimin stepped closer again, closing the space that kept trying to rebuild itself between them. Because I'm more afraid of walking away and wondering what would have happened if I didn't. Jungkook's breath caught. That was something he understood too well. You don't get it, Jungkook said, quieter now but no less intense. It's not just about us. Jimin frowned. Then what is it about? Jungkook hesitated. And for the first time since this started, he looked like he might actually retreat. Jimin noticed immediately. No, he said, sharper now, don't do that again. Do what? Pull back right when it starts to matter. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You think I want to? Then stop. Silence. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, packing once like he was trying to shake something off, but it didn't work. You think this doesn't affect everything else? Jungkook said suddenly, his voice rising slightly. You think this doesn't change how people see us, how they talk, how they... I don't care about them, Jimin cut in. I do. The answer was immediate. Honest. And it landed. Jimin stilled, his expression shifting. Why? Jungkook let out a frustrated breath. Because it's not just about what I feel, it's about what happens after, it's about what we lose if this goes wrong. Jimin's voice softened, but the intensity didn't fade. And what if it doesn't go wrong? Jungkook didn't answer. Because that possibility, that fragile, terrifying possibility, was the one he had been avoiding the most. Jimin took another step closer, his voice quieter now. What are you really afraid of? Jungkook laughed under his breath, but it sounded strained. You. Jimin blinked. Me. Yes, Jungkook met his eyes again, and there was no hesitation this time. Because if this is real, if what we just said actually means something, then you're the only one who can break it. Jimin's chest tightened. That's not fair, he said quietly. It's the truth. No, Jimin shook his head. The truth is you're scared of something you don't control. Jungkook didn't deny it. That's how this works, Jimin continued, his voice steady despite the way his heart pounded. You don't get guarantees, you don't get certainty, he exhaled softly, you just choose whether it's worth it. Jungkook's gaze searched his face, as if trying to measure that. And you think this is, he asked. Jimin didn't hesitate. Yes. That certainty hit harder than anything else. Jungkook looked away for a moment, his shoulders rising and falling slowly. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, Jimin said, it's just clear. Jungkook let out a quiet breath, almost like he was laughing at himself. It's never been clear for me. Jimin softened slightly at that. Then stop trying to figure it out in your head. Jungkook frowned. Then how? Jimin didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward again. Closer than before. Close enough that Jungkook didn't have time to react. And then, he grabbed Jungkook's wrist. It wasn't rough, but it wasn't hesitant either. It was intentional. Grounding. Real. Jungkook froze instantly. Jimin. Stop thinking, Jimin said, his voice low, steady, leaving no room for argument. Just feel it. Jungkook's breath hitched. Because the contact, simple as it was, felt like too much. Jimin's grip wasn't tight, but it was firm enough to keep Jungkook from pulling away, and for a moment Jungkook didn't try. He just stood there, feeling it. The warmth, the closeness, the reality of something that had only existed in fragments before. This is what you were afraid of, Jimin asked softly. Jungkook's voice came out uneven, part of it. Jimin tilted his head slightly. What's the other part? Jungkook hesitated. Then quieter. That I wouldn't be able to stop. The word sent something sharp through Jimin's chest. Stop what? Jimin asked, even though part of him already knew. Jungkook's gaze dropped briefly to where Jimin was holding his wrist, then lifted again, darker now, heavier. Wanting more. The air shifted again. This time it felt almost electric. Jimin didn't let go. Then don't, he said quietly. Jungkook's breath caught again. You don't know what you're saying. I do. You don't. I do, Jimin repeated, his voice firmer now, because I feel it too. That broke whatever control Jungkook had left. His other hand lifted instinctively, hovering near Jimin's arm like he wasn't sure whether to pull him closer or push him away. You're making this harder, Jungkook muttered. Jimin's lips curved slightly, but there was no teasing in it, only something soft, something honest. It was already hard. Jungkook let out a quiet, frustrated breath. You're impossible. And you're running. I'm not. You are, Jimin cut in, but not anymore. Jungkook stared at him, caught between resistance and something far stronger. Why now? Jungkook asked suddenly. Why are you saying all of this now? Jimin's expression shifted, more serious now, more open. Because when you played that melody, he paused, his voice softening, it felt like you were telling me something I wasn't supposed to hear. Jungkook's chest tightened. And I realized, Jimin continued, if I walked away from that, if I ignored it like we've been ignoring everything else, I'd regret it. The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Jungkook swallowed hard. So this is just about not regretting it? Jimin shook his head slowly. No. Then what is it? Jimin's grip on his wrist tightened just slightly, not enough to hurt but enough to anchor the moment. It's about you. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. Jungkook's defenses faltered completely this time. You don't get to say things like that and expect me to stay calm, he said, his voice barely steady now. Jimin stepped closer again, until there was no space left between them at all. I'm not asking you to stay calm. That was the final push. Jungkook's restraint snapped completely. His hand moved fast, instinctive, grabbing Jimin's arm, pulling him closer, not gently, not carefully, but like he had been holding back for far too long. "Do you even understand what you're doing to me?" Jungkook asked, his voice low, almost shaking. Jimin didn't pull away. "Do you?" he asked back. Their faces were close now. Too close. Every breath shared. Every movement amplified. Jungkook's grip tightened slightly, his composure hanging by a thread. "You keep saying you feel the same, but you don't act like you know what that means." Jimin's eyes didn't waver. "Then show me." Jungkook froze. Just for a second. And then something shifted in his expression. Something decisive. Something he couldn't take back. "You really want that?" Jungkook asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Jimin nodded once. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Without fear. And that was all it took. Jungkook exhaled sharply, like he was letting go of the last piece of control he had left. "Then stop me," he said. Jimin didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't even breathe. And Jungkook didn't stop. Jimin didn't stop him. That was the first thing Jungkook realized. The absence of resistance, the way Jimin stayed exactly where he was, close enough that every breath felt shared, every second stretched beyond control. "Say something," Jungkook murmured, his voice strained now, like he was holding himself together by instinct alone. Jimin's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "Because this wasn't something words could fix." "Jimin," Jungkook said again, softer this time but more dangerous, "if you don't want this, you need to tell me now." The weight of that pressed in hard. Jimin finally moved, not away, not back, but closer. "Why would I stop you?" he asked quietly, "when you're the one who said you couldn't anymore?" That shattered whatever hesitation Jungkook had left. His grip tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to make it real, undeniable. "You're not making this easy," he said, almost breathless. "It was never supposed to be easy," Jimin replied. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty, it pulsed, alive with everything they had been holding back. Jungkook searched Jimin's face again, as if looking for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that would give him a reason to step back. But there was none. Only certainty. Only something open and unguarded, in a way that made Jungkook's chest ache. "You're serious?" Jungkook whispered. Jimin nodded once. "I am." Another beat. Then Jungkook laughed quietly, but it sounded almost broken. "You're going to ruin me." Jimin's expression softened just slightly. "You're already halfway there." That pulled something sharp from Jungkook, a breath, a reaction, something that felt like the edge of losing control. "Then don't act like you don't know what you're doing," Jungkook said, his voice lower, now rougher. "I do know," Jimin answered. "I just don't want you to keep pretending you don't want it." Jungkook's gaze darkened. "I never said I didn't want it." "No," Jimin said quietly, "you just kept running from it." That struck deep. Jungkook's hand shifted from Jimin's arm, sliding up slightly, hesitant for just a second before settling, like he was testing the reality of the moment. "You think I can just change overnight?" Jungkook asked. Jimin didn't hesitate. "No, but I think you can stop lying to yourself." Jungkook's breath came out uneven. "That's harder than you think." "Then why does this feel so easy right now?" Jimin asked softly. Jungkook didn't answer. "Because it did feel easy. Not simple, not safe, but right." And that terrified him more than anything else. "You don't trust this," Jimin said, not as a question but as a realization. Jungkook looked away briefly. "I don't trust anything that feels this intense." Jimin's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't let go completely. "Why?" "Because things like this don't last," Jungkook admitted, his voice quieter now. "They burn out, they turn into something else, and then you're left with—" He stopped himself, his jaw tightening. "With what?" Jimin pressed. Jungkook shook his head. "With something you can't go back from." Jimin studied him for a moment, really studied him, like he was trying to understand every layer Jungkook had built around himself. "And you think avoiding it makes that better?" Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't respond. Because he didn't have an answer. Jimin took a slow breath. "You're so focused on what could go wrong that you're ignoring what's already here." Jungkook's gaze flickered back to him. "And what's that?" Jimin didn't look away. "This." The word was simple, but it carried everything. The closeness, the tension, the unspoken understanding that had finally become something real. Jungkook's chest tightened. "You make it sound so certain," he said. Jimin's voice softened. "It is." Jungkook searched his face again, as if trying to find cracks in that certainty. But Jimin didn't waver. "Not this time." "You're not scared at all?" Jungkook asked. Jimin let out a quiet breath. "I am." "Then why stay?" Jimin's answer came without hesitation. "Because you're worth it." That was the moment everything shifted. Not the tension, not the closeness, but something deeper. Something that went beyond the moment itself. Jungkook's expression faltered, his composure slipping completely now. "You don't get to say things like that and expect me to stay rational," he said, his voice barely holding together. Jimin's lips curved slightly, not teasing, not light, just honest. "I'm not asking you to." Jungkook shook his head, almost in disbelief. "You're dangerous. And you're still here." That silenced him. Completely. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook exhaled slowly, like he was making a decision he had been avoiding for too long. "Say it again," he said. Jimin blinked. "What?" "What you just said." Jimin held his gaze. "You're worth it." Jungkook's breath caught again. "Don't say it like that," he murmured. "Like what?" "Like it's simple." Jimin stepped even closer, if that was even possible now. "It is simple," he said softly. "It's just not easy." Jungkook closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them again, something had changed. The hesitation wasn't gone, but it wasn't in control anymore. "You're going to make me do something I won't be able to take back," Jungkook said. Jimin didn't move. "Then don't take it back." The words landed, heavy and final. Jungkook inhaled sharply. "You don't understand what that means," he said. Jimin's voice didn't waver. "Then show me." That was it. No more distance. No more hesitation. No more pretending. Jungkook's hand moved again, this time not hesitating, not testing, just acting. He pulled Jimin closer, closing the last fraction of space between them, his grip firm, certain, like he had finally stopped fighting himself. "Last chance," Jungkook whispered, his voice low, almost shaking despite the control in his movements. "If you want me to stop." "I don't," Jimin said immediately. No pause. No doubt. And that was all it took. Jungkook's restraint broke completely. Not violently. Not recklessly. But fully. Everything he had held back, everything he had buried in silence and half-truths, it surfaced all at once, raw and undeniable. "You have no idea what you've been doing to me," Jungkook murmured, his forehead almost brushing Jimin's, his voice uneven but honest in a way it had never been before. Jimin didn't pull away. "Then stop holding it back," he replied softly. Jungkook's breath hitched. For a moment. Just one. Everything felt suspended again. Balanced on the edge of something irreversible. And then, Jungkook made his choice. Not out of impulse. Not out of pressure. But because he finally stopped running. And this time, he didn't hold back. Jungkook's decision didn't come like a storm. It came like something inevitable. The space between them disappeared completely, not in a sudden rush, but in a quiet, undeniable shift, like gravity finally taking hold of something that had been suspended for far too long. Jimin felt it first in the way Jungkook's hand steadied against him, no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. There was intention now. Wait. A quiet kind of resolve that made everything feel more real than anything they had said. "You're still not stopping me," Jungkook murmured, his voice low, almost disbelieving. Jimin's answer came just as quietly, "I told you I wouldn't." Jungkook searched his face one last time. Not for doubt, but for permission. And what he found there wasn't hesitation. That was enough. The tension that had been building for so long finally broke, not into chaos, but into something softer, something far more dangerous because of how real it felt. Jungkook leaned in, closing the last breath of distance between them, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow into a single point of contact, a single shared moment that neither of them could take back. Jimin didn't move away. He didn't hesitate. If anything, he leaned into it, into the truth of it, into the reality they had both been avoiding for far too long. And for a second, everything else disappeared. No expectations. No consequences. Just the quiet, overwhelming confirmation of something they had both already known. When they pulled back, it wasn't far. Not enough to rebuild distance. Not enough to pretend. Jungkook's breathing was uneven now, his composure finally slipping in a way that felt completely unguarded. "That's," he trailed off, shaking his head slightly, like he couldn't find the right words. Jimin's chest rose and fell just as unevenly, but there was something steadier in his gaze now. "Real," Jimin finished for him. Jungkook let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh but softer. "Yeah." A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was fragile. Like something new had just been placed between them, something that needed to be handled carefully, or it would break. Jungkook looked at him again, more seriously now. "We can't pretend that didn't just happen." Jimin shook his head. "I don't want to." "That's not what I mean." "I know," Jimin said quietly. The reality of it started to settle in, not all at once but slowly, like a wave creeping back in after it had pulled away. "This changes everything," Jungkook said. Jimin held his gaze. "It already did." Jungkook exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair again, but this time it wasn't out of frustration, it was something closer to disbelief. "I spent so long trying to avoid this," he admitted, "trying to convince myself it wasn't worth it, that it would just complicate things, that it would ruin what we already had." Jimin's expression softened, and now... Jungkook hesitated. Then quieter. "Now I don't think I could go back even if I tried." The honesty in that didn't feel heavy. It felt grounding. Jimin stepped just a little closer again, not because he needed to close the distance, but because he didn't want it back. "Then don't," he said. Jungkook's eyes flickered with something uncertain again, though it didn't have the same strength it did before. "You're making this sound simple again," he murmured. Jimin shook his head. "No, I'm just not making it harder than it already is." Jungkook studied him for a moment, really studied him, like he was trying to understand how Jimin could stand there so calmly when everything had just shifted so completely. "You're not worried?" Jungkook asked. Jimin paused, then answered honestly. "I am." Jungkook's gaze sharpened slightly. "Then why don't you look like it?" Jimin let out a quiet breath. "Because I'd rather deal with what comes next than go back to pretending nothing was there." That was the difference between them. Jungkook had spent so long trying to protect what they had by avoiding change. Jimin was choosing to face it, even if it meant losing something. Jungkook looked away briefly, processing that. "You always do that," he said after a moment. "Do what?" "Choose the harder option like it's obvious." Jimin's lips curved faintly. "It's not obvious, it just feels right." Jungkook let out a quiet, thoughtful hum, like he was trying to make sense of that. "And what if this goes wrong?" he asked. Jimin didn't hesitate. "Then we deal with it." "That's not an answer." "It is," Jimin said. "It's just not a guaranteed one." Jungkook looked back at him, something shifting again in his expression. "You really mean that?" I do. Another silence settled between them, but it felt steadier now, less fragile. Jungkook's shoulders relaxed just slightly, like the weight he had been carrying wasn't gone, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. There's still everything else, Jungkook said after a moment, quieter now. The workshop, the others, the way people are going to notice. Let them, Jimin said simply. Jungkook frowned. You say that now. I'll say it later too. You don't know that. Jimin met his gaze. I do. Jungkook searched his face again, like he was still expecting to find doubt somewhere, some crack in that certainty, but there wasn't one. You're serious about this, Jungkook said. Jimin nodded. Yes. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his thoughts clearly still racing, but something in him had shifted enough that he wasn't trying to run anymore. Then we don't hide it, Jungkook said, almost like he was testing the idea out loud. Jimin tilted his head slightly. Do you want to? Jungkook hesitated, then shook his head. No. That answer surprised even him. Jimin noticed. You don't sound convinced, he said. I'm not used to this, Jungkook admitted, to just choosing something without thinking about all the consequences first. Jimin's expression softened again. Then think about this one. Jungkook looked at him. And for a moment, everything else faded again. What? Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin stepped closer one last time, not because there was distance, but because he wanted to make sure there wasn't any left at all. That you're not doing this alone, Jimin said. The words settled deep. Deeper than anything else that had been said. Jungkook's breath caught slightly. That's new, he murmured. Jimin smiled faintly, not teasing, not light, just real. Then get used to it. Jungkook let out a quiet breath, something softer now, something that almost sounded like relief. Okay, he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it meant everything. Jimin nodded once. Okays. For a moment they just stood there, the silence no longer heavy, no longer fragile, just steady. Something had shifted. Something had settled. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. And this time, neither of them tried to pull away. You took long enough. The voice came out of nowhere, slicing through the fragile quiet like a blade. Jimin froze. Jungkook's head snapped toward the direction of the sound, his body instinctively shifting just slightly in front of Jimin, without even realizing it. At the far end of the hallway, near the dim spill of light from the workshop door, someone leaned lazily against the wall. Taehyung. Arms crossed, expression unreadable, eyes sharp. How much did you hear? Jungkook asked, his voice instantly colder, guarded again in a way Jimin hadn't seen since before everything broke open. Taehyung pushed himself off the wall slowly, his steps unhurried as he walked toward them. Enough, he said simply. Jimin's chest tightened. The air that had just begun to feel steady shifted again, heavier now, more exposed. This isn't your business, Jungkook added, sharper this time. Taehyung raised an eyebrow, almost amused. Isn't it? Jungkook's jaw clenched. No. Taehyung stopped a few steps away, his gaze flickering briefly between them, taking in everything, the closeness, the tension, the way neither of them had moved apart. You two are terrible at hiding things, Taehyung said almost casually. Jimin exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay grounded. We're not trying to hide it. That caught Taehyung's attention. Oh, he said, tilting his head slightly, that's new. Jungkook shot Jimin a quick look, something uncertain flashing across his expression, but Jimin didn't back down. We're not pretending anymore, Jimin added. Taehyung studied him more closely now, the faint amusement fading into something more thoughtful, more serious. You say that like it's simple, Taehyung said. It's not, Jungkook muttered under his breath. Then why do it, Taehyung pressed. Silence followed. Jimin answered first. Because not doing it was worse. Taehyung's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, then shifted to Jungkook. And you, he asked. Jungkook hesitated. Only for a second. But it was enough for Taehyung to notice. You're still thinking about the consequences, Taehyung said, not as a question. Jungkook exhaled slowly. Someone has to. Taehyung gave a small, knowing nod. That's always been your problem. Jungkook frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means, Taehyung said, stepping closer, his voice quieter now but more pointed. You think too far ahead. You try to control things that haven't even happened yet. And you don't think that matters, Jungkook shot back. I think, Taehyung replied, his gaze steady, that you've been using it as an excuse. The words landed hard. Jungkook's expression darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. Taehyung didn't flinch. I know you. That silence again. Different this time. Sharper. Jimin could feel the tension rising, not just between him and Jungkook anymore, but spreading outward, pulling something deeper into the surface. Why are you even here? Jungkook asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Taehyung shrugged lightly. I came looking for you. For what? Taehyung's eyes flickered briefly toward Jimin, then back to Jungkook. To remind you of something. Jungkook frowned. What? That this, Taehyung gestured vaguely between them, doesn't just affect you. Jimin stiffened slightly. I never said it didn't, Jungkook replied. But you're acting like you can just decide this on your own, Taehyung said. Jimin's voice cut in, calm but firm. It's not just his decision. Taehyung looked at him again, something unreadable passing through his expression. No, he agreed, it's not. The weight of that hung there. Jungkook's frustration started to show more clearly now. If you have something to say, just say it. Taehyung held his gaze for a long moment. Then, quietly, you think you're the only one who noticed? The question hit differently. Jungkook's expression faltered. What? Taehyung's voice remained steady, but there was something beneath it now, something that hadn't been there before. You think this just started now, he continued. You think no one saw the way you look at each other, the way things changed between you two a long time ago. Jimin's breath caught. Jungkook's eyes narrowed slightly. What are you implying? Taehyung let out a soft breath, like he had been holding something back for a while. I'm saying, he said, slower now, more deliberate, you weren't the only one dealing with it. The hallway seemed to go quieter. Jimin felt something shift again, something unexpected, something that didn't quite fit into what he thought this moment was supposed to be. What does that mean? Jimin asked carefully. Taehyung looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time there was no teasing, no distance, just something honest, something complicated. It means, Taehyung said, his voice softer now, that watching the two of you pretend nothing was happening was frustrating. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. Why would that matter to you? Taehyung hesitated. That was new. Taehyung never hesitated. And that made something in Jimin's chest tighten. Because it wasn't as invisible as you thought, Taehyung said finally. That's not an answer, Jungkook said. No, Taehyung agreed, it's not. Silence. Heavy. Complicated. Jimin stepped forward slightly, his voice quieter now. Then give us a real one. Taehyung's gaze lingered on him, something shifting behind his eyes. For a moment, it looked like he might actually say it. But then, he looked away. And that said more than anything else could have. Jungkook noticed too. Wait, Jungkook said, his voice tightening. Are you? He didn't finish. But he didn't need to. Taehyung let out a quiet, almost amused breath, though it didn't reach his eyes. You're not the only one who's bad at saying things out loud, he said. Jimin's heart dropped slightly. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The tension shifted again, deeper now, more complicated than before. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. This is not the time for this. Taehyung gave a small nod. I know. Then why bring it up? Because you need to understand something, Taehyung said, his voice steady again but quieter. Whatever you decide to do now, it doesn't just stay between you two. Jimin frowned slightly. We're not asking it to. Taehyung's gaze met his again. That's the point. Silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't just about them. It was bigger, messier, more real. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his shoulders tense again. So what, you're saying we shouldn't do this? Taehyung shook his head. No, he said. I'm saying if you do, don't pretend it won't change everything else too. Jimin held his gaze. We already know that. Taehyung studied him for a moment, then gave a faint nod. Good, he said quietly. Another pause. Then he stepped back slightly, creating distance again, not physically large but enough to shift the moment. I'm not here to stop you, Taehyung added. Just don't act surprised when things get complicated. Jungkook let out a quiet, frustrated breath. They already are. Taehyung's lips curved faintly, but there was no real amusement there. Then you're right on track. And just like that, the moment shifted again. Not broken, but changed. Jimin felt it settle in his chest, heavier than before. Because this wasn't just about them anymore. And for the first time since everything started, the future didn't just feel uncertain. It felt unpredictable. You always do that. Jungkook's voice came out sharper than before, cutting straight through the tension Taehyung had left behind. The hallway felt colder now, like something invisible had shifted into place, pressing down on all three of them even after Taehyung had stepped back. Taehyung stopped mid-turn. Slowly he looked over his shoulder. Do what? Drop things like that and act like it's nothing, Jungkook said, his jaw tight, frustration finally surfacing in full. You don't get to just say something like that and walk away. Taehyung sighed quietly. Like he had expected this, I wasn't planning to walk away. Then stay, Jungkook challenged. A beat of silence. Taehyung turned back fully this time, his expression no longer unreadable. There was something sharper in it now, something more exposed than before. Jimin stayed quiet, but his chest felt tight, his thoughts racing faster than he could sort through them. Fine, Taehyung said. You want clarity? Let's stop pretending any of this is simple. Jungkook crossed his arms, his posture defensive again. It never was. No, Taehyung agreed, but you made it worse by pretending it was nothing. Jungkook's eyes flashed. You don't get to lecture me about that. Why not? Taehyung shot back, his voice rising slightly. Because I didn't say it out loud, because I didn't make it obvious. Jimin's breath caught. There it was again. Not direct, but not hidden either. Say what? Jungkook pressed, his voice quieter now, more dangerous. Taehyung held his gaze. For a long moment, it looked like he might finally say it clearly. But instead he shook his head slightly, his expression tightening. You already know, he said. No, Jungkook replied immediately. I don't. You do, Taehyung insisted, his voice lower now steadier. You just don't want to deal with it. Jimin stepped in then, his voice calm but firm. Stop. Both of them looked at him. The tension snapped toward him instantly, sharp and heavy. This isn't helping, Jimin continued. If you have something to say, say it. Don't circle around it like this. Taehyung's gaze softened slightly when it landed on Jimin, but the conflict in it didn't disappear. That's easy for you to say, Taehyung murmured. Why? Jimin asked. Because you already made your choice. The words hit harder than expected. Jimin didn't flinch, but something in his chest tightened. And you haven't? Jimin asked quietly. Taehyung didn't answer. That silence. That was the answer. Jungkook let out a slow, frustrated breath, running a hand through his hair. This is getting ridiculous. No, Taehyung said, his voice steady again. It's just finally honest. Jungkook shook his head. Honest would be actually saying it. Taehyung's expression flickered. You think I don't know that? Then do it. Silence fell again. Heavier this time. Jimin could feel it building, something inevitable pressing forward, something none of them could stop anymore. Taehyung looked between them once more. At Jungkook. At Jimin. At the space between them that wasn't really space anymore. And then, quietly, I liked you too. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to. Jimin felt his breath catch, his mind stalling for just a second, like it didn't know how to process it fast enough. Jungkook went still. Completely. What? Jungkook asked, his voice barely there. Taehyung let out a small, almost humorless breath. You heard me. That's not. Jungkook stopped himself, his expression tightening. Since when? Taehyung's lips pressed together briefly. Does it matter? Yes, Jungkook said immediately. It does. Taehyung hesitated. Then, long enough, he admitted. The weight of that settled heavily in the space between them. Jimin's thoughts raced, trying to piece together moments, interactions, small details that suddenly felt different under this new light. You never said anything, Jungkook said. Taehyung gave a faint, tired smile. Neither did you. That's not the same. No, Taehyung's gaze sharpened slightly, because from where I was standing it looked exactly the same. Jungkook fell silent. Because he couldn't argue with that. Jimin finally spoke, his voice quieter now, more careful. Why didn't you tell me? Taehyung's eyes shifted to him again, something softer flickering there, something that made Jimin's chest tighten again. Because I knew, Taehyung said simply. Knew what? That it wasn't me. The honesty in that. It hurt more than anything else. Jimin's breath caught slightly. You don't know that. Taehyung shook his head gently. I do. Jungkook frowned, his confusion mixing with something else now, something more complicated. Then why say it now? Taehyung exhaled slowly. Because you both finally stopped lying to yourselves. Silence. Thick. Unavoidable. Jimin felt something shift inside him again. Not the same as before, not the same clarity or certainty, but something heavier, something that came with consequence. You're making this harder, Jungkook muttered. Taehyung let out a quiet breath. It was already hard. That doesn't mean you had to. I didn't plan to, Taehyung cut in, his voice firmer now. But you asked for honesty. This is what it looks like. Jungkook looked away, clearly struggling to process it. Jimin stayed still, his thoughts tangled, emotions pulling in too many directions at once. This changes things, Jungkook said after a moment. Taehyung nodded slightly. Yeah. But it doesn't change this, Jungkook added, his voice steadier now as he looked back at Jimin. Jimin met his gaze. There was no hesitation there. Not now. I know, Jimin said. Taehyung watched the exchange, something unreadable passing through his expression again, but this time it didn't look guarded. It looked resolved. I'm not asking you to change anything, Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook frowned. Then what are you asking? Taehyung shook his head. Nothing. Then why? Because I needed to stop pretending too, Taehyung said. That made everything still. Jimin felt it settle, not like a disruption anymore, but like a truth that had finally found its place, even if it complicated everything. Jungkook exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders, though not all of it. This is a mess, he muttered. Taehyung gave a small, genuine smile this time. Yeah. Jimin let out a quiet breath, his chest still tight but steadier now. It's not just a mess, he said, it's real. Both of them looked at him. And for a moment, that was enough. No more pretending. No more half-truths. Just three people standing in the middle of something complicated, something emotional, something impossible to ignore. And somehow, still standing. No more running. Jimin's voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the hallway with a clarity that cut deeper than anything else that had been said. The air felt still again, not tense this time, not suffocating but waiting. waiting for something final. Jungkook looked at him first. Taehyung watched quietly. And for the first time since everything had unraveled, Jimin didn't feel pulled in different directions. The confusion, the hesitation, the weight of everything unsaid, it settled into something calmer, something steadier. Not simple, but certain. We've said everything halfway for too long, Jimin continued, his voice softer now but no less firm, and it just made things worse. Jungkook exhaled slowly, nodding faintly. Yeah. Taehyung didn't speak, but his gaze didn't leave Jimin. Jimin took a step forward, not toward one or the other, but into the center of it, where all of it existed at once. I don't regret any of this, he said. Not the confusion, not the timing, not even how messy it got. Jungkook's expression shifted slightly, something vulnerable surfacing again. Then what do you regret? Jimin paused, waiting so long to be honest. The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Taehyung let out a faint breath, almost like a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. That makes three of us. Jungkook glanced at him, then back at Jimin. So what happens now? That question. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt open. Jimin looked at Jungkook, really looked at him. Not just the tension, not just the emotions, but everything underneath it. The fear he had tried to hide, the honesty he had finally chosen, the way he stayed even when it got difficult. Then Jimin turned to Taehyung and saw something just as real. Not the same, but real. Something that had existed quietly, without demand, without expectation. And that mattered too. I can't pretend this didn't change things, Jimin said slowly, because it did. Neither of them interrupted. I care about both of you, he continued, his voice steady, grounded in truth instead of hesitation, but not in the same way. The honesty in that didn't cut. It settled. Jungkook's breath caught slightly, but he didn't look away. Taehyung's expression softened, just barely. Jimin turned back to Jungkook. What I feel for you, he hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted to say it right. It's not something I can ignore anymore. I tried and it didn't work. It only made things worse. Jungkook's chest rose and fell slowly. And now, he asked quietly. Jimin stepped closer, not rushed. Not uncertain but deliberate. Now I don't want to ignore it, he said. That was enough. Jungkook's composure didn't break this time, but something in him eased, like a tension he had carried for too long had finally found somewhere to rest. And me, Taehyung asked, his voice calm but softer than before. Jimin looked at him again. There was no avoidance in it. No guilt. Just honesty. You matter to me, Jimin said, more than I probably realized before all of this. Taehyung nodded slightly, accepting it before Jimin even finished. But it's different, Jimin added. I know, Taehyung said gently. And he did. That was the part that hurt the least. Because it wasn't rejection. It was truth. Taehyung exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing in a way they hadn't since the beginning of this. I think I knew before you did, he admitted quietly. Jimin's lips pressed together faintly. Then why stay quiet? Taehyung gave a small, almost thoughtful smile. Because I didn't want to force something that wasn't mine. Jungkook glanced at him, something like understanding flickering across his face. That doesn't mean it didn't matter, Taehyung added. Jimin nodded. It did. And that was enough. Not perfect. Not painless. But enough. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was a complete. Jungkook stepped forward slightly, his presence no longer hesitant, no longer caught between staying and leaving. So we stop pretending, he said. Jimin nodded. We already did. Jungkook let out a quiet breath, something steadier now, more grounded, and we deal with whatever comes next. Jimin's expression softened. Together. That word. It stayed. Taehyung watched them both, something calm settling into his expression, something that hadn't been there before. You two are really bad at keeping things simple, he said lightly. Jungkook huffed a quiet laugh. We never said we were good at it. Jimin smiled faintly. For the first time it felt natural again. Not forced. Not fragile. Just real. Taehyung stepped back then, not dramatically, not like he was leaving completely, but enough to give them space that didn't feel like distance. "I'll see you inside," he said. Jungkook nodded. Jimin met his gaze one last time. "Thank you," Jimin said quietly. Taehyung tilted his head slightly. "For what?" "For being honest." Taehyung smiled faintly. "Took me long enough." And then he turned, walking back toward the workshop, his steps steady, unhurried. Not escaping. Just moving forward. Jimin watched him go for a moment before turning back to Jungkook. The hallway felt different now. Lighter. Not because everything was resolved perfectly, but because nothing was hidden anymore. Jungkook stepped closer again, not with urgency, not with tension, but with something calm, something certain. "So," Jungkook said quietly, "this is real." Jimin nodded. "Yes." Jungkook studied him for a moment, then let out a soft breath, almost like relief. "Then I'm done pretending too." Jimin's lips curved slightly. "Good." A quiet moment passed between them, but it didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt steady. Like something had finally found its place. Jungkook glanced toward the workshop door, then back at Jimin. "We should probably go back." "Probably." Neither of them moved right away. Not because they were unsure, but because they didn't need to rush anymore. After everything, after all the hesitation and silence and almosts, they were finally standing in something real. And that was enough. Jungkook reached out, not hesitantly this time but naturally, his hand brushing against Jimin, before settling there. Jimin didn't pull away. They stood like that for a second longer. Then, together, they walked back. Not as they were before. Not uncertain. Not unfinished. But changed. And finally, honest.